part 2. Okay, going back. So again, that's according to Burns. Okay, Burns defined learning as a relatively permanent change in behavior. It's either observable or internal. So hindi ibig sabihin, lesson dito, hindi ibig sabihin na hindi mo nakikita ay hindi niya na natutunan. So what to do, sir, para balong? You test, you evaluate, give exams. Okay, either performance task, either paper pen test, or whatever type of test is applicable to that type of learning. So if you want to make sure that they learn, evaluate. That's the answer. Kaya sa dulo ng lesson plan is evaluation. That's to test learning. Okay? Hindi pwedeng iwan na lang natin basta-basta na i-assume ay natutunan ng lahat ng yan. No. You need to test, you need to gauge, you need to measure, you need to have figures. Hindi pwedeng haka-haka lang. Okay? And it's one of our responsibilities as a classroom teacher. Hindi lang turo ng turo. You need to evaluate. Okay. According to SANTROK, in 2012 defined learning as a relatively permanent influence on behavior. So learning happened because of influence, either from a person or either from the environment, okay? Based from experience. So there should be a contributory element. Ayan. Influencing element. Kailangan may nag-i-influence. Kasi kung ikaw lang mag-isa, okay, andun ka lang sa kwarto mo habang buhay, what you are going to learn is everything about isolation. Lahat ng nasa sulok ng kwarto mo yun lang. But when you go out, when you speak to people, will learn. Yung sumakay ka lang ng jeep, nakita mo, naka-face mask lahat, tapos wala kang suot, you learn na hindi ka pala nagdala ng face mask. So we learn from this influences coming from the external factors. Okay? Pwede rin naman internal, yung ikaw mismo. Okay, knowledge and thinking skills. It is a long-term change in mental representations or associations. So ito naman ang maganda kay SANTROK. What SANTROK considers as learning is something that is long-term. Hindi yung ni-review mo ngayon, pumasa ka sa test, after 2 weeks nakalimutan mo na. Hindi daw learning yon according kay SANTROK. Mamin kayo, ginagawa nyo yan. Pag-exam, so memorize. After the test, kalimutan. Forget. Kung tinanong na next time, wala nang maalala. May magkaroon na ng temporary amnesia. So again, according to SANTROK, sa perspective to ni SANTROK, we are studying the perspective of SANTROK. Learning is something that should be long-term. It's a long-term change in mental representations or associations. Okay. Learning does not include changes that are physiological. What do we mean by this? Learning does not include changes that are physiological. What is meant by this? Yes, Miss Delphine. Miss Delphine?
Yes po.
Okay. Yes, Miss Delphine, how do you understand this sentence? Learning does not include changes that are physiological.
Physiological.
Pag sinabing physiological, it's physical, no? Miss Delphine.
Parang po, parang sa yung sa kay John Dewey na learning by doing. Yung learning po kasi parang hindi lang sa specific na subject yung natututunan mo, but pwede rin sa mga iba't ibang behavior po.
Okay, it's about behavior. Speaking about behavior, you did not mention about something physical. Pag sinabi bang, let's say for instance, tumangkad ka, Miss Delphine, learning ba yun? Do you consider that as learning? Nag-increase ang height mo? Nag-increase ang height mo?
Yes po.
Isn't it automatic na mag-increase ang height ng tao kahit wala kang gawin?
Oh, it depends naman po sa isang tao. What if meron siyang kapansanan?
Speaking of those exemptions.
Normally. Normal naman po yung isang tao na tumatangkad or tumataba.
Okay, basta kumain ka lang, no? Basta, you don't need to memorize anything. You don't need to socialize, as long as you eat, you address your physical needs, then you will grow. And according to, thank you, Ms. Delphine, according to this statement, that's not learning because that's automatic. That's your physiological response. Na kahit wala kang gawin, talagang we will grow physically. We will change physically. Yung mga pagbabago sa katawan natin, mangyayari at mangyayari yan. Kahit nga yung mga kapansanan, may mga pagbabago pa rin sa katawan nila as they grow old. And according to this perspective, that's not learning. Okay? It's not something that is physiological. So learning is with effort. Ayan. It's either effort or effortless. Effortless dun sa mga experiences, sa mga bagay-bagay. With effort, like for formal education, formal instruction, you exert effort to learn, to listen. Okay? Next. A learning theory. Okay, we're still on defining a learning theory. Learning theory is an organized set of principles explaining how individuals acquire, retain, and recall knowledge. So when we speak of learning theory, it's about the acquisition, about retention. It's about knowledge. Okay, how do we acquire? How do we retain what we have learned? Okay, so that's what we mean by learning theory. It's an explanation. Okay, principles explaining about acquisition and retention of knowledge. So everything that runs into that topic, it's a learning theory. Okay, and that's our focus for this session.
Ganda niya sa picture, man.
Ay, maganda daw siya sa picture. Sino kaya yun? Sino kaya Miss Photogenica Manuanda? Okay, let's move to the third part. What are the types of learning? So based on this, on your screen, we have 7 types of learning. We have motor, we have verbal, we have concept, we have discrimination, we have learning of principles, we have problem solving, and attitude. So let's start with motor. When I say motor, ayan, natutunan mong tumakbo, maglakad, that's motor learning. Okay, natutunan mong luto, ayan, that's a movement, that's motor learning. Natutunan mong tumayo, you learn to stand, you learn to walk, to crawl, to dance, that's motor learning. Ayan, psychomotor nga, di ba, sa ating lesson plan. Next, learning could be verbal. Okay, everything about language and communication. If you learn how to speak, if you learn how to create a speech, either written or orally, then that's verbal learning. Okay. Another, we have concept type of learning. It is a form of learning which requires the use of higher order mental processes. Okay, like thinking, reasoning, and analyzing. Okay, that's the third type of learning. Next is discrimination. It's like differentiating. You've learned how to differentiate between an apple fruit and a guava fruit. Nalaman mo ang pagkakaiba ng genders. Okay, male and female and everything in between. And those in between. Okay, that's discrimination. You've learned how to discriminate, to differentiate things from the other things. Next, learning of principles. So this is a type of learning that relates to science, ayan, mathematics, and grammar. Ayan, if you've learned how to apply the principles of communication, that's learning of principles. The principles that are that were taught to you in a mathematics class, especially when it comes to numbers, you've learned how to apply them into problem solving. That's learning of principles. Okay. Next, we have problem solving. And of course, you know problem solving. So still, problem solving, just like for concept, this involves higher order thinking processes. Okay. But for this problem solving part, for this type of learning, it involves more than one mental process. So nag-i-interpret ka, may kasama pang analysis, may kasama pang abstraction. Tulong-tulong sila. Okay, unlike dun sa third type, for concept type of learning, it refers to higher order mental processes. We treat them individually. Like thinking, it's about thinking. Reasoning, reasoning. Analyzing, analyzing. But for problem solving, all of these mental processes work together. And last, of course, we have attitude. So a type of learning referring to a change in behavior. Okay? Ayun yung affective part of learning. So far, do you have questions before we resume? If you have questions, please, I'm giving you the opportunity to turn your mic on. Okay, wala. Tahimik ang kapaligiran. Basta tayo kumututudturan niya, walang matutulog. Okay, ako tutukiking sala kabang makiramdam ka na ako. Abayanan niyo ko. King miglakwan, ay asaya. Oh, joke. Okay, let's move to the fourth question. What is meant by learner-centered? Na nasagot na natin kanina. But we are going to repeat it on this slide presentation. Learner-centered is a perspective that focuses on individual learners. Again, highlighting individual learners. It means that you do not consider common needs. That when you enter a class, you don't think na lahat ng klase mo, lahat ng estudyante mo, pare-pareho ang pangangailangan. No. You think of individual learners having unique needs, unique interests, and unique perception about life. Ganun ang tingin mo. That's why when you teach this learner based on their individual needs, based on their individual interests. Makanano, itaster nung 40 la rin estudyante, 40 lesson plan na daliwang strategy yung gamitan ko? No, that's not what we mean. Dito na pumapasok yung differentiated instruction. That from time to time, papalit-palit ka ng strategy na ginagamit to address all individual learning needs. So again, that's how we define learner-centered. Okay, for learner-centered, remember this concept. Learner. Of course, our focus is the learner. Remember also the concept of learning process. That's why it's learner-centered. You focus on the process of learning, not on your content. That's not the emphasis. Not on the subject. The emphasis should be on the learner and the process of learning. Paano sila matuto? That's what we mean by learner-centered. Na kapag magtuturo ka, ang iniisip mo are the ways on how you are going to relate your plan into action, into your class. Okay, that's your focus. Na kapag ito na ang school year, you are thinking, how will I teach my learners? And you will start with profiling. Ayan, alamin mo yung gusto nila, yung mga bagay na interesado sila. That's becoming a learner-centered teacher. Okay? Remember also the psychological factors. It's psychological kasi may mental processes involved. That's why learner-centered relates to psychological factors. Okay? It's external, or we have the external and contextual factors. What do we mean by external and contextual factors? External, you are a factor, teacher. Ayan. External yan. The school, the environment. These are external factors that affect learning. At kailangan din ba natin isipin yung mga bagay na yan? Yes. When we teach, consider also the external factors because these external factors affect the learner and thereby affect learning. Another, the contextual factors. Okay, by the way, yung external, it's the opposite of psychological. Yung psychological, that's inner. That's within the learner. What's happening in the mind of the learner. Okay? For contextual factors, depending on the context, the setting, the setup, that when you go from one place to the other, one community to the other, mababago-bago ang pangangailangan nila. Okay? Also, remember that when you use the concept or when you apply learner-centered teaching, principles are not treated in isolation. They work together. Okay? Mamayang babangitin natin, we are going to list down one by one the different principles about learner-centered teaching. So, we do not treat them individual na etong principle lang ang gagamitin ko sa araw na to. Bukas naman yung isa. No, they work together every day. At some point, unconscious ka. At some point, conscious ka na nag-work sila together. Okay? And that's the reason why we are studying, for you to know, to assess yourself. Baka turo ka ng turo, nagamit mo na pa, ay, yun yung madalas yung ginagawa, yun pala yung tawag sa principle na yun. Okay? Or another way to assess your teaching, ay, ginamit ko na po ni principle number 1, 2, and 3. Ay, kaya pa trying principle number 4. Ay, kaya pa ikit. Try kaya pa bukas. So, you know how to differentiate your instruction because you have the understanding of these principles. Again, under learner-centered concept, principles are not in isolation. Okay, learner-centered psychological principles. They are classified into 4 categories. It's either cognitive and metacognitive, motivational and affective, developmental and social, and last we have individual differences. So let's start. Okay, again, we are moving to the topic, to the question, what are the learner-centered psychological principles, which we already listed a while back. So those are the 4 major classifications. Ito, yung kanina. Okay, let's start with the cognitive and metacognitive factors. Ayan. Nature of learning. What is the nature of learning process? Pag sinabing learning process, how do you understand it? Anyone? Miss Salonga? Hazel? Miss Hazel Salonga? What do you think is the nature of learning process? If you're going to theorize, sige, kunyari isa kang theorist, at bibigyan ka ng pagkakataon na mag-theorize about learning process, what is your current assumption about the learning process? Yes, Ms. Salonga? Ms. Salonga? Sige, while Miss Hazel Salonga is still thinking about her self-devised theory, let's discuss, okay, about the nature of the learning process. So it says here that complex subject matter is most effective when it is intentional. Ayan. Ayan daw ang nature ng learning process. If it's intentional, then it's most effective. We are not saying that those things which are unintentional are not effective. But we are saying, what we are saying here is that if it's intentional, if learning process is intentional, pag sinabing intentional, pinagplanuhan, sinadya, like in school, no? Everything is planned. It is most effective. Okay? That's the first principle. Another principle relating to cognitive and metacognitive factors. The goals of learning process. It says here, the successful learner over time, with the guidance, of course, of an adult or a teacher, can create meaningful and coherent representations of knowledge. And that's true. That's why we are here. That's another principle. Kapag may guide daw na mas nakakaalam, if you have heard about Lev Vygotsky, scaffolding, theories about scaffolding and MKO, or the more knowledgeable other, na ang learning daw mangyayari kapag merong guide, okay, na dapat more knowledgeable yung guide na yon. Ayun, kung pareho lang daw ang knowledge, ang level ng knowledge ng student, okay, ng learner, at nung teacher, nung guide, learning will not happen. Ayan ang learning principle number 2. And I agree with that. That's why, as teachers, anong laging sinasabi? We should be not only pages ahead, we should be books, library ahead of our learners. Eh, pwedeng aldoldo, yung estudyante mo pa yung tuturo kaya ka, no. You should be ahead. And how to do that? Read and read, study and study. That's why I always advise my college education students to pursue higher studies, because learning should not stop for teachers, okay? Because of this principle. Okay, next. Construction of knowledge. The learner can relate new information in meaningful ways. In meaningful ways. Okay, and when I say meaningful ways, it should be something relevant. Okay, it should be based on real life problems. another meaningful ways, nagiging meaningful lang sa kanila yan if it's relevant to them. If what you are teaching is not relevant to them, there will be no construction of knowledge. They will not be interested. Tignan nyo ang bata na mahilig magsayaw. Okay? Kapag dancing na ang topic, buhay na buhay. Kasi dancing for that kid is meaningful. Okay? That's why construction of knowledge will happen. Okay? That's the principle of construction of knowledge. Fourth principle, strategic thinking. It says here that learner can create and use a repertoire or list of thinking and reasoning strategies to achieve complex goals. Ayan. When I say strategic thinking, we have different ways to organize our thoughts into our minds. Okay? Na si Hazel, iba yung paraan niya ng pag-conceptualize or pag-iisip kumpara kay Leo. Na si learner letter A, iba yung paraan ng pag-solve niya ng isang problema kumpara kay Ana. That's what we mean by strategic thinking. We have unique way of mental representations or representing everything mentally. Next, thinking about thinking. Perhaps you have heard about this. Yung metacognition. Diba? Hazel, can you share something about thinking about thinking? Narinig mo na ba itong phrase nito, Hazel? Thinking about thinking. Paano ba isipin ng tungkol sa pag-iisip? Hazel, nagsasalita ka na ba? Hindi kita marinig. We can't hear you. Parang may problema sa audio si Hazel. We can't hear you, Hazel. Siyempre rin yung ibang nakikinig dyan, maganda-handa na rin kayo. Baka maitos sa inyo ang tanong. Sige, while we are waiting for Hazel to solve some technical issues on her laptop, let's have Miss Pagyo, Katrina.
Sir.
Yes. How do you understand thinking about thinking?
Para po sa akin, sir, yung thinking about thinking is yung mas nag-iisip ka pa po ng mas malalim, sir.
Paano ba mag-isip ng mas malalim ang isang Katrina? Paano ba mag-isip ng malalim?
I mean po, sir, yung hindi lang po sir, yung hindi lang po sir, yung doon yun lang po yung naisip mo, parang meron pa pong may deeper pa po.
Okay, I get your point. You're saying or stating something about death, and that's true. But sinabing thinking about thinking, talagang malalim na yan. At paano ba yan? If you have heard about the concept of metacognition, learning how to learn, thinking how to think, it's a way for a learner to assess his or her own study habits. Like, kung tinanong ko si Katrina, paano ka ba mag-aral? That's thinking about thinking. At tapos ito si Katrina, iisipin niya, paano nga ba ako nag-aaral? Paano ko ba pinoproseso ang mga bagay-bagay? Paano ko ba nga natututunan? Ano ba ang paraan ko ng pagkatuto? What are my ways to learn? Tapos inisa-isa na Katrina, I learn best when I review everything kapag alas 7 na ng hapon, ng gabi. O kaya pag madaling araw, doon ako mas madaling matuto. Okay? Merong specific time of the day, di ba? Yung katawan natin, our body, our mind, na kung saan parang sponge siya na pag pinakinggan agad makukuha. But there are specific time of the day na kahit anong gawin mo, parang ang hirap matuto. Kapag iniisip mo, if you are thinking about this study habits, these ways of you to learn, for you to learn, that's thinking about thinking, that's metacognition. Okay? It's higher order thinking strategies and metacognition. HOTS. Remember that. HOTS and metacognition for principle number 5. Next, context of learning. It says here that learning is influenced by environmental factors, and that's already given. Hindi na kailangang ipaliwanag yan. Kaya isang eskwelahan, requested na sa lugar kung saan ka dapat matuto, dapat conducive to learning. Kaya mapapansin nyo yung mga eskwelahan, malayo sa daan, malayo sa ingay. Because that's a requirement, okay? The context of learning. Next. Okay, let's move to the second category. Motivational and affective factors. So first, we have motivational and emotional influence. Of course, motivation is a very big factor. Okay, it's a very big factor in learning. Motivation influences learning. Kahit gaano pang pagtuturo ang gawin mo, if they're not motivated, they will not learn. That's why part of the lesson plan, unang-una na activity is motivation. How will you motivate your learner to listen? Okay, motivate them. Make them realize that what you are teaching, what you are reading in class is important. Next, emotional influences. If they are not emotionally ready, whatever you do, they will not understand what you are saying. Isang bata, kapag wala sa mood mag-aral at ngawa ng ngawa, okay, kahit napaupuin mo yan, okay, sa tabi mo, kahit takutin mo yan, if they are not emotionally prepared, they will not learn. That's another principle. Next principle, the principle about intrinsic motivation. Yan. It's about the personal interest, choice, and the inner drive. Talking about intrinsic motivation. Na kaya kayo nananatili dyan, why you are staying in this Zoom teleconference, it's either you are required or talaga namang gusto mong matuto. That's an inner drive. That's intrinsic. Nanggagaling sa'yo without forces or without factors coming from the outside. Na ikaw mismo, you yourself will say that I want to learn this one because I want to be someone. That's intrinsic motivation, and that's best. Okay, that's another principle of learning. Another principle, the effects of motivation and effort. If someone is really motivated to learn, kahit wala ka na, magre-research pa yan about sa topic. Because they are motivated. That's another principle. Okay? Diyan na pumapasok yung extended learning, type of learning. The effects of motivation and effort. Next. Okay, developmental and social factors. First, we have the developmental influences. Okay? When it comes to learning, of course, there are certain requisites. Okay? Learning is better when differences in social and personal aspects of development is taken into account. Social and personal aspects of development. Consider the development of the child. Okay, baka wala pa siya nung skill na itong basic skill, tapos tinuturo mo na is complex. Okay, definitely, whatever strategy you use, kahit mag-tabling ka pa dyan, kung yung tinuturo mo ay hindi akma dun sa skill na meron siya, at wala pa siya nung prerequisite skill na tinatawag, the learner will not understand what you are saying. Turo ka ng turo ng division, hindi pa siya marunong mag-add. You are teaching about multiplication, but the learner does not know how to add. Okay? So the developmental task stages affect or influence learning. Next, social influences on learning, like for social interactions, interpersonal relations, ayan, communication with other people, it affects learning. Okay? Katulad ngayon, you interact with us in this online session, you learn. You go outside and intermingle with people, socializing with people or socialization. Yan, you learn. You learn about, when say learning, it's not only something about academic, okay? It's about everything that we'll learn about life, okay? Next, individual differences, okay? I think another category. So the first principle under individual differences, of course, is individual differences. That learning happens at different pace, at different speed. Na kahit pare-pareho ang tinuro mo sa 40 na estudyante mo or learners mo inside your classroom, you expect that there will be differences when it comes to outcomes because we have individual differences. Remember, they're coming from different family background. They are coming from different cultural backgrounds. Therefore, expect that there will be differences when it comes to the learning outcomes. Huwag kang mag-expect masyado na pareho naman yung tinuro ko, nakinig naman sila. They were all sitting there while I was speaking. They were given the same activity, but why did they not learn the same? Why did they gain different scores? Because of individual differences. Again, remember that. Next, learning and diversity. So it says here that teaching and learning process should take into account the differences among others. Ayan. Kaya huwag kang magturo thinking that everyone inside the classroom has common needs na pare-pareho ang kailangan nila. Like for sure here, if you are 29 here, iba-iba ang gusto nyo when it comes to a type of music. Meron sa inyo yung gustong pop, may gustong rock. Meron yung gusto yung acoustic lang, di ba? So we all like music, but there are differences and diversity. So we should consider that when we teach. Next, for standards and assessment. Ito ang sabi dito sa principle na to. When stating the standards, okay, when you are assessing, it should be appropriately high than the current level of the learner. So pag nag-set ka daw ng objectives, dapat yung objective mo is at least one level higher than the current skill, the current learning of the child. Kung natutunan niya ng addition, well, bakit ka pa maglalagay ng objective na for them to learn how to add? Eh, alam na nila yun. Of course, ma-achieve mo ang objective na yan kahit hindi mo ituro. So if they've learned about addition, then you try something higher than addition. Okay? Ano ba ang susunod sa addition? Subtraction, multiplication. Ayan. So that's another principle for standards and assessment. Again, talking about learning. So there should be appropriately high goals and standards and challenging activities for learning to happen. If the activity is not challenging, it's just status quo. They will just remain where they are. Okay, so what are the learner-centered strategies now introduced by SANTROCK? Here are the following. It could be problem-based learning. It could be through the use of EQ. It could be through discovery learning. So remember these three. These are learner-centered strategies. So pag sinabing problem-based, from the word problem, you introduce the problem, let them solve. Let them experience. Okay? Katulad sa science, if you give experimentation, and then they will answer questions afterwards, that's problem-based. Okay? That's also a form of discovery learning. They will discover by their own. Okay? I don't see problem-based. What makes this unique from discovery learning is that for problem-based learning, you introduce real-life scenarios. Okay? You introduce real-life scenarios or real-life situations that when you introduce a problem in mathematics about addition, kukunin mo iba't ibang konteksto kung kailan nila ginagamit ang addition, katulad ng sa pagsusukli, sa palengke, pagbabayad sa G. Okay? These are the examples which you are going to give. For EQ naman, this is another strategy. This is the use of questions that call for HOTS, H-O-T-S, or higher order thinking skills, instead of a simple yes or no question. True or false, al toldo. Hindi EQ ang tawag dyan. Essential questions are those questions that call for higher order thinking skills. Yun yung nagre-reason out na sila. Yan na yung why. Yan na yung if you were on the shoes of the character, if you were given this problem, what do you think is the best solution for the current health crisis we are experiencing at present? Yan yung mga EQ, mga tanungan na EQ. Hindi yung, pag sinabi, who is our national hero? Is that EQ? No. How to transform that into an essential question? Instead of basic recall lang, pwede siya, why do you think Jose Rizal become our national hero? Or why do you think Jose Rizal became our national hero? What are the qualities that, what were the qualities that he possessed that made him a national hero? Ayan, EQ na siya. So again, these are the top three learner-centered strategies. Don't forget them. Okay, kasi under K-12, sinasabi, laging promise, it's learner-centered. So if you are confused what strategy to use, ayan na yung tatlo sa screen nyo. Next, okay. What are the theories of learning now? So here are the theories of learning. So meron tayong tatlong malalaking number dyan, 3 big theories, and yung mga anak nila. Ayan. The 6 theories that emerge from the 3 major theories. So the 3 major theories are behaviorism, cognitivism, social constructivism. And emerging from these theories are social learning theory, social constructivism, experiential learning, multiple intelligences,